please?
We're already live streaming, so we're live.
All right, great. All right, we're going to get started here in about a minute.
No slides or anything?
No slides. No. Do you need any? All right, everybody. So today we have the honor of hearing Pete Newell and Teresa Smetzer in a little fireside chat. These are two individuals that have been there and done that. So everything that we think that's new and exciting and oh my gosh, we're doing innovation. These individuals have been doing it for a long time. And so, it's on their shoulders, on their efforts in the past that we are now, taking to the next level. So, taking the next 45 minutes to hear some of their experiences, understand some of the pitfalls that they ran into. So have them help identify the landmines that they know exist out there so that on our individual journeys or organizational journeys that maybe we can learn some of those lessons so we can accelerate the results that we're trying to bring forth. So first off, Teresa Smetzer, she is the former director of cyber innovations for the CIA and a current Austin resident for the last 3 months. And then Pete Newell, who is also has a place here in Austin, but the CEO of BMNT, a great partner in this DoD innovation ecosystem across services. So to start off, if Teresa, if you could just brief introduction and tell the group about yourself.
Just as a clarification, I actually retired from CIA in mid-April of this year. And so I can't speak for CIA, but what I can speak to is the 30-plus years of experience of being in government and then moving to industry and working for big companies and small companies, starting my own company, investing in companies, and then returning to government to stand up an organization that is called Digital Futures within the Directorate of Digital Innovation. And Digital Futures' mission, in essence, is a startup within government with the mission of accelerating the identification and adoption of industry-leading digital technologies and processes. So early in my career, I was a technical intelligence analyst for CIA, and probably 10 years in, I became much more interested in data, technology, analytic methods, what became data science. And really that's cast the sort of rest of my career, is looking at ways in which technology and data can help the intelligence mission across the IC, not just within my organization. So my comments today will be based on my total experience and not representing my former employer, just to be clear. So I'm happy to be here today. It's a great honor. Anything we can do to help AFWERX achieve their mission is good for me, and so it's I'm pleased to be here and happy to answer any questions I can.
So the good news is I can't speak for the CIA either. I think the last time we did this was like a year ago. Well, we're on to Travis. When they launched Phoenix Spark. So I'm Pete Newell. I am the CEO of BM&T. I'm the co-author and co-founder of Hacking for Defense, which is that really cool graduate course that is solving some really nasty problems with the government. And I host a podcast for Stanford's radio station called The Innovators. So I wear a lot of hats. I think in terms of relevance to the folks in this room, in my previous life as an almost retired colonel, I ran what was the Army's Rapid Equipping Force, which was essentially their skunk works. I know how to spend government money, and I spent a lot of time solving problems in really crappy places. When I retired, I had issues, and I had a lot of emotion wrapped around the challenges of getting folks with problems to the point where they could communicate them to people who would do something about them and get them to communicate that with people with money, then actually build pipelines that would bring new things to folks at the speed that they needed to consume it. BM&T was launched literally with 4 guys and a girl in a driveway in Palo Alto, California, with the intent of powering organizations to innovate at the speed and deliver where they needed to, the way the world needs it today. We're fortunate that we're able to work closely with folks like AFWERX, ONR, the NGA, the DIA, the CIA, the NSA. The beauty of what our team has been able to do is we get to watch all of you, and in most cases get to knock down some of the barriers, but we've got some really great data that's helped us build tools that have helped people create these really beautifully viable innovation pipelines that are allowing things to actually be delivered. I say that, both as a startup founder who's, in a company that's got 50 people in it, and is on the Inc. 5,000 list for the second time in a row, and has started making investments in our own technologies and things. So I'm ready to talk about a wide swath of things, or meander off the stage and do whatever you want.
All right, no, thank you. And so, Pete and Teresa, I know you know this too, but there's actually really something interesting that you said in your introduction is problems. Like, so often, we throw requirements out there and we think those solve our problems. And so, in your experience, as you've seen, how government has traditionally gone about it, and then how we should be going about it, could you talk a little bit about that?
I've just, for a variety of reasons, found myself over the course of my career always being involved in either leading or some sort of digital transformation or change management initiative. And the thing I've seen the most that's has resulted in sort of failure to deliver is focusing too much on the technology, right? So it's tempting to say, hey, here's a cool technology, now let's find a problem to apply it to. And that you've got to have an understanding or an awareness of what the technologies are out there and what's possible. But in my experience, if you don't start with mission, if you don't start with the customer, if you don't start with a clear problem that somebody that is on the pointy end of the stick has, and if they're not involved in every step of the way, it's really hard to transition something into a meaningful kind of adopted sort of capability. The second observation I would make is, everybody loves to throw stones at acquisitions for failing to come up with an appropriate way to quickly buy stuff, right? And I think the military in particular has done a better job of that than some of the intel organizations. But really, if you think about it, how do you get those stakeholders involved from the beginning, right? And it's not just acquisitions. It's security. It's counterintelligence. It's supply chain. It's what environment are you ultimately going to have, assume success, what environment are you going to have to move into? And how do you make sure you're taking that into consideration? I've seen a lot of really good technical companies do what they thought the customer wanted, and really not undertake the time, or have the government needs to take the time, right, to explain exactly what success looks like. What is the outcome? What is that environment? How do you get those stakeholders involved early on? And so those are the kinds of things that I found make a huge difference. If you do that up front, it just makes the likelihood of a successful outcome much higher, rather than do something really cool and then figure out, okay, what do I do have to get this through the certification accreditation and all the other hoops that you have to go through in the government. So that, assume success, get the stakeholders involved, and make sure that mission, or the folks who have the ultimate problem, are really involved in what you're doing, so that this is more about culture than anything, and that's the hard kind of soft and squishy part of the innovation challenge, right? Because if the government, in my experience, if the government has a certain way that they've been doing things, it's highly requirements driven, it's highly programmatic, they've been budgeted to do something, and suddenly some upstart comes in and shows them something that completely disrupts their view, their worldview. If they haven't been involved, how likely do you think it is that they're going to be like, oh, this is great, I'm just going to throw all this stuff out the door and I'm going to embrace what you've just told me I can do, right? If you have them involved in the beginning, then it's a little easier to kind of think through, how's that going to work? How's that innovation ultimately going to transition into capability? So those are some of the things that I've learned the hard way after many years of experience, just to take into consideration, whether you're government or whether you're an industry, whether you're a small startup, it affects everybody to have that sort of systems view of all those factors.
I go all over the map. So I guess I'll start with, my really, the epiphany I had over problems in Afghanistan. I found at a certain point in time that I had an organization that was really product-centric. And they were great at picking low-hanging fruit and throwing things over the wall and driving forward. And nobody ever held them accountable for whether or not they actually solved somebody's problem. They're always moving so fast. But if you ever stopped them and said, hey, come back and tell me, how much of the stuff that you delivered is sitting in a Connex someplace not being used? And as we really dug into it, we realized that we'd become really passive. We sat on the fobs next to the division headquarters, and as people drove by and told us about our things, that's what we worked on, versus organizing ourselves to get out at the edge of the battlefield where new things were happening, and training and teaching people to capture the heart of a problem. We got to the point that I told guys that stop sending me reports and stop sending me PowerPoint. I issued GoPros to the teams and I said, you give me a 1.5 minute video of somebody talking about their problem where it is. That's all I want from you. Because I was so frustrated that I couldn't get the context from the environment where we're going. I'll flash forward a little bit to the point where we'll talk about portfolio management at some point, but I realized that there are really kind of 3 classes of problems out there. One is when you put people on the battlefield, the way 2 commanders on the opposite side of the fight approach the battle creates problems. Remove one of them and replace them with somebody else, you get a new set of problems. So it's not that they don't need to be solved, but I call them credit card problems. The half-life of that problem is so short that if you're not buying something off the shelf and throwing it in the battlefield, you're never going to develop something that solves that problem. Of course, if you're a company who's delivering a solution to a problem like that, and you're talking about 3-year sales projections, you're kidding yourself. So knowing where your problem fits in that environment is huge. The second group was what I call environmental problems. As long as we are building village stability platforms and putting patrol bases in the mountains in Afghanistan, we're going to have this massive resupply problem that eventually looks like 5 donkeys and a goat herder trying to move 5 kilowatt generators up a mountain with a bunch of fuel. Move that to the Philippines and that problem, same problem, different environment, presents itself in a radically different manner. Those are worthy of more innovation, more work, but it's still an immediate problem that might not be something that turns into a program of record, although you may have to pay for it for the next 5 years. And then finally are what I call the 2,000-year-old. Since we started fights, we've been putting people in guard towers with weapons looking for the bad guys. And quite frankly, it's no different now than it was in the French and Indian War when the French were standing in towers with flintlock rifles waiting for the Indians to crawl closer and shoot arrows at them. We're doing the same thing. The distances are longer. Same thing. Those things are what I call program of record worthy, long-term, iterative process of change. And of course, the last one is really the moonshot stuff. How can I make all that? How can I make bases go away altogether? If you're in this environment and you're trying to figure out where you fit, for companies, slide number 2 in your pitch deck is almost always the problem you're solving and the scale of it. For the government folks, slide number 2 is here's my requirement. And then there comes some flat lines after that. And so the coaching we give people, both on both sides, is start the conversation with a deep understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. And I wish to say that we're really good at that, but the data we get from, we taught hacking for defense in 22 universities last year. I don't know how many problems, well over 400 problems went out. Not a single problem that we curated and put a lot of work into survived first contact with a class. And in fact, everybody knows what a pivot is. The student's first pivot is looking at the problem sponsor and saying the problem's wrong. And we find that over and over and over again. So it's, I never say deep, messy, but it's a basic understanding of the problem you're trying to solve is where everything moves forward from.
So, we start at the problem, and if we can truly understand that, so, taking it to the next level, and, as we have, potentially, lots of problems out here, in the Air Force and everything. Now, how do they take that problem, and then, in your experience, how good is the government at communicating that problem effectively to non-traditional or traditional vendors in order to get that solved? So do you have any advice in how to open up those communication lines in an effective manner?
Particularly for the IC and my former agency, that highly classified, very sensitive environments, very cautious about engaging industry for fear of revealing something that would be sensitive, right? I get that. And it made sense. As our earlier speaker said, it made sense 20, 30 years ago, but does that make sense today, right? So some of the things that I've seen work very effectively is work within the organization to come up with unclassified use cases that really are strong, or business analogs that are really strong representation of our problems, but don't have the details that would be revealing. And that's a cultural change, right? So that has really helped to be able to then go to industry and say, hey, here's some use cases, give us your thoughts on how you could address these problems without really understanding the sort of how the government would apply that, right? So that's one tool. The second is we've set up, I've seen successfully set up innovation hubs in places like Silicon Valley, obviously, here in Austin, Boston, Salt Lake, and the point of that is to get into the mix of the ecosystem of where the investment money's going and where there are startups. The danger is they become sort of show ponies for the government, right? Oh, this is cool. We have this cool place. Come visit. It's really neat. So what I've seen work effectively is to really, my personal favorite, I guess, is the mission model canvas from the Lean Startup and Steve Blank and Pete and others. If one page you force anything before you bring it to those innovation outposts, force a clear statement of what is the problem you're trying to solve. Who is the government owner of that problem? Who are the stakeholders? What is the outcome? If you're wildly successful, what does that press release look like that says, hey, what is the timeline? What are the milestones that you expect to see? And what that does is it forces up front the conversation about what are you really doing, so that at these innovation hubs, you can really engage industry with these unclass use cases, and you can force the discipline of something like the mission model canvas to be really clear, and then you can see outcomes that you can bring back. Include mission in those in that engagement, right? Bring them out to participate at the innovation hubs, and that way you get more buy-in and ownership from the beginning. I've found that industry really does want to help government, but they've got to figure out what that means to them, right? The heuristic that I've heard used in the past is that if you're a startup or a growth stage company, and the government's going to ask you to do more than 15% of your deviation from your roadmap, you got to think really seriously about, hey, is this worth going after this? You're a small company, limited amount of money, you've got a commercially viable product. How do you make sure that you can manage that strategic decision to go after something in the government, which is going to be a longer lead time, which is a little more iffy, high payoff if it's successful, and I've seen companies struggle with that sort of decision, particularly with limited engineering resources. The other thing I've seen really work well is government folks generally are inclined to set up advisory boards or external groups that are old people like me that, oh, I've done this a long time. Surely she has some good ideas from the good old days, right? Well, that's helpful to some extent, but what I've seen much more effectively is go out to industry and pick a group of 6 or 7 or 8 CTOs who are young upstarts who've already done 1 or 2 companies, who have zero knowledge or expertise in the government. Get them together, use some of these unclassified use cases, and get the dialogue going in some sort of, or even have a hackathon type setup where 2 or 3 days you get these guys working for you without the constraints of the government mindset. We've gotten more outcomes that are positive from that sort of engagement than the more traditional externally advisory group. The other example I've seen that was really effective is when I was in industry, I had a government client put together a group of a really high-powered lawyer who was a judge, an academic in a field that had nothing to do with government, a CEO of a startup company that was doing early psychographic work before it evolved into sentiment analysis and social media. A really eclectic group of people. Get them in a room and throw them a problem and spend 2 days and say, well, what would you do about this? How would you think about this problem? Oh, a futurist, that was another participant, a crazy futurist who was like way out there, a sci-fi type guy, right? Get those people in a room, and the creative energy around how they think about a problem was amazing. The challenge, how do you take that back to the government and get them to say, okay, now what do we do about this, right? So I think there's examples of things you can do that are really sort of break the mold of the traditional approach, and at least from those really more traditionally cloistered organizations, that's helped to open up, the optic on just what's possible and see how unconstrained really our engagement could be. The trick is then how to bring that back in, and that's involving mission, involving customers, involving stakeholders so that they're participating in every single aspect of what you do. So those are some examples of how we've broken down those barriers.
So, essentially a problem is a startup waiting to happen. And, I got some really bright folks that do this for a living. The challenge I give to people who are producing problems is to first strip out all the requirement stuff, and then go look for an analogous or digital twin for that problem in the commercial space someplace. And I will tell you that there isn't a problem that I've seen, particularly within the Air Force, that does not have a representative twin or equal in a commercial space someplace. And simply the act of looking for the twin out there will teach you a lot about the technology and the sociology in the community around that problem. It will also teach you how to articulate it so that you can attract a much bigger group of people to it, so that you can down select and agitate the right folks to start working on that problem. But that process of going through that is all about getting the language of the problem correct, so it is the most attractive thing that you can put on the street that will get people to come to you. Now, once you've got that, then you start having these really rich conversations about the technology behind it and other things. As Teresa said, I'm such a fan of what Alex Osterwalder and Steve Blank did with the business model canvas, and when we rewrote the mission model canvas thing, you know, part of it was designed to ensure that when we started talking about a problem, that we nailed the value proposition for the user, not the buyer. Yeah, so we always said, mission achievement. Explain to me what mission achievement looks like in the eyes of the user in the environment that they're in, because it's easy to solve a problem perfectly where the solution is impossible to consume because it disrupts everything somebody's doing. But if you get what we call product mission fit, which means like the right product and that solves the mission, that's the first time that I've actually looked at somebody and said, okay, that's a valid problem. But we know what the targeting solution is for it. And with that in hand, then it's a matter of getting the language right, looking at technology, realizing where you are in the portfolio. Is this a 6-month thing? Is it a 3-year thing? Is it a 10-year thing? And then disciplining yourself to pursue the answers based on what you got from that. I say it over and over and over again. Everything that we talk about related to problems in building teams are sociology problems. We are hindered by our ability to speed this cycle of recognizing what a problem really is, getting it written in plain English so that we can attract a much larger group and then down select them and get it to the point where we're confident that we're working on the right things and that thing is conditioned and ready to throw into our platform or pipeline. And invariably, when we don't do that, what we've done is we've clogged the pipeline full of crap. And I won't throw the agency under the bus, but for the innovators out there, in so many cases, they showed up, and you guys probably went through this, they showed up and stood up the office, and God and everybody brought their innovation projects to them. And in this particular agency, I think the director said there were 184 separate projects that weren't attached to problems. And it was consuming their capital and the bandwidth trying to clean it up. Problem first, product mission second, big ecosystem third.
No, that's great. So, assuming we're going after the right problem, and we're looking towards a non-traditional company, you know, whether it's a cyber company, to provide a solution. You know, we're asking a lot of people who aren't trained in, you know, those interactions and, you know, to understand some of the hurdles young companies have to go through in order to deliver product. So, you know, specifically, you know, looking through the SBR lens, which is small businesses, and, you know, we're asking a lot of people that aren't used to interacting with small businesses to go out there and work with them for solutions. What are some, you know, good things that people can look for to say, hey, this is a company worth working with, and some red flags that should caution them to stay away from a particular vendor?
So one point I would highlight that I see as a real challenge for the federal government writ large is, you know, frankly, I'd be dead by the time I talk to all the companies that have some cool technology that's interesting. The idea that I can just go out and talk to them all and vet them all and then figure out which ones are the most appropriate is pretty silly, right? So how do we find a way to collaborate across the federal government, not just DOD and the IC, to say, okay, has anybody talked to company X? Have they done a tech eval? Have they thought about the viability of that company financially and otherwise? What is the business model, right? And leverage and sort of a knowledge sharing, collaboration capability experience we already have with a company. I mean, InQtel, for example, for the intelligence community, is one source of that expertise for us. InQtel talks to a lot of companies as a venture capital arm. They have a lot of insight. Imagine if we could share that insight across the community, across the federal government, to know if, not to say they're qualified or not qualified, but just have the insight of what experience somebody's already had. Today, that's virtually impossible, right? The second point I would make is I was fairly heavily involved in the artificial intelligence initiative across the Directorate of National Intelligence. If you think about it, of those of you who represent companies, everybody's got machine learning today, right? Your marketing stuff, almost all of it, shows some application of machine learning because that is the flavor du jour, machine learning. But what does that really mean? How many of these things are algorithms that are based on open source code that any smart kid or few kids you could throw in a room and in 3 weeks they could create something similar with open source libraries? How do you vet that? How do you determine exactly what is under the covers, if you will, right? So I don't blame the companies. I think anybody who's aware of the sort of priorities today will say machine learning is clearly something that applies to a lot of problems the government has. But what does that translate into in terms of capability in a business that's viable? And so, I think that's a real challenge for the government in saying, of the hundreds of thousands of companies that we want to work with, how do we know what's a good fit technically as well as from a business perspective? And so I think it's really incredibly promising when you think about the venture capital money and other investments that have gone into private industry the last 3 to 4 years, and which is only going to grow given the cash that a lot of companies have. How does the government harness that? That is a big challenge. And so I think we're learning as we go.
It's just really uncomfortable conversation because it goes two ways. And the question is red flags when it comes to looking at companies. And I will tell you personally, up until really recently, I was a critic of SBIR stuff. It was my experience at REF and in other places. I got a lot of what I call puppy mills, people who were really good at spitting out tech and getting SBIR phase 1 grants and things like that, but they didn't build companies. They built a company that produced repetitive, patentable things, but nothing ever came from it. And so I was really skittish when one of those folks showed up. We'd start to ask questions about, okay, what is the commercial business case for what you're doing? And if the first words out of the mouth, well, we're really focused on the military market right now, I would take 2 steps back. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but if you're talking to a company, particularly in this environment, and they can't articulate what the commercial business case for what they're doing is, they are unlikely to show up and be a scalable entity who will deliver your solution down the road. We launched AFWERX Labs out of BM&T this year, partially because we were looking at these NASA teams and things, and we recognized there were 3 things that we wanted to nail our understanding of. The first was the technology readiness level. When somebody steps up and says, I have this thing, I can tell you by changing 3 words in a sentence, I can change the technology readiness level of something from a 6 to an 8. Anybody not done it? But it's not a yes-no thing. It's just tell me what it really is in the context of the problem I'm trying to solve. The second one is the investment readiness level. And the investment readiness level is about the team. Are these co-founders or is it a single founder? Is this a family thing? Is it a business thing? Do they truly have IP? Is there something that's going to build it? Quite frankly, if you don't have any IP in your company, your likelihood of attracting investors to do something is really low. You'll look at, from a financial standpoint, is there a track record here? Are they seed funded, friends and family funded? Are they Series A? Are they Series C? And what's their next round? And what's their timeline? Now, I can't tell you how many people have said, I'm in the middle of a raise, and I had a company do this to me. I was writing a $2 million check to them to deliver the world's coolest thin film solar that I was putting on top of UAVs and doubling the range of them. And they went to a Series C raise, and they failed. And they were bought by a Chinese company. We lost them for 6 years before we were able to get that technology back. And so you really got to understand the financial side of what it takes to build a company. And quite frankly, government folks, particularly in Silicon Valley, their behavior pattern for a lot of years was to do tech tourism. To show up, look at the tech, consume the time of company CEOs that quite frankly is really expensive, and not leave anything behind. And by leave something behind, I mean that I don't talk about the problem. I don't give you any feedback on I don't care if you show up and look at a company and you hate what they're doing. Tell them honestly, I hate what you're doing. And the small companies die for good, solid, honest feedback, not BS. You don't need to breathe sunshine into the room, but they want honest feedback. It works two ways, is the government folks have to show up with at least an understanding of what it takes to build a company. And if you can't do that, you're fishing without bait. The last thing, the TRL, the technology drill, the investment readiness level, which is about the team that's going to deliver my stuff, and the final one is an adoption readiness level. And this is really about the company looking at the government folks and saying, okay, if I do this, who are you? Are you the user? Are you a buyer? Who's the first person who's going to deploy my MVP so that I get feedback so I can do an improvement? And then, what kind of money am I using to do that? And how does that fit with my fundraising portfolio someplace else? But that adoption readiness level is literally about being able to map a pathway by which I can get the first couple of tests done, get something adopted and into the field and get really rich feedback on, and eventually build a pathway into a program of record. So I think in this room we got a mix of SBIR Phase 1, Phase 2 people. I'll tell you, the SBIR Phase 1, if you're not thinking today about what that adoption readiness level looks like to you and what that pathway is, you are spinning your wheels and wasting time. If you're a Phase 2 and you got a government customer and a bear hug, squeeze harder until something legitimate falls out and somebody can actually explain what the directory is. Because you're running out of time. And in many cases, you're running out of money.
There's one more red flag I want to raise that I forgot to mention, that just riffing off Pete's comments. I've had companies do this. When I ask companies, who are your competitors and how would you compare yourself? And they say, we don't really have any competitors. Huge red flag to me, right? Somebody that knows the market they're in, somebody that understands who they're, companies that are doing similar things and can clearly differentiate how they're unique and how they compare to some of these other companies. Okay, that's somebody that has done a level of kind of analysis that's truthful and that really is understands their market position. If you get somebody that says, we don't really have any competitors, we're unique, big red flag to me. So just for what it's worth.
Oh, thank you. And so, Pete, something that you brought up that I think is important for this group, you mentioned tech tourism.
Made my trip work.
Yeah. Tech tourism, the term innovation theater. So, senior leaders, we just saw Dr. Roper, and, there's more and more opportunities to, quote unquote, innovate. And so how do we delineate, value-added innovation versus that tech tourism or innovation theater? How can individuals know if an activity, if the juice is worth the squeeze?
I'm almost guaranteed to get in trouble here. So if I offend anybody, I apologize. I don't mean to to sound as brutal as I do. 3 years in, we have gotten better at killing off the theater. And you know, it's unfortunate. Steve Blank and I have written a lot about the innovation pipeline, and BM&T has really done yeoman's work in understanding what the 5 phases of innovation are. What are the activities that support each one of those phases? What are the methodologies that are applied that actually get things done? What's the data you can collect, and then what's the decision making that happens between them? Unfortunately, most people who come into the innovation space, the first thing they say, well, I'm going to run a hackathon. In about 30 seconds later, you start asking yourself, okay, why? Well, I want to solve this problem. And say, okay, do you really think in 48 hours you're going to find the solution to that problem? An unvalidated problem to begin with. And you start to peel apart and say, listen, one of the toughest things to do if you're building an innovation pipeline is not deliver solutions. It's not the technology, but it's actually at the front end of the pipeline where you're trying to source people, tech, ideas, and problems. And the kind of way I describe it is, if you're trying to deliver one new thing into a program or record a year, you need at least 200 at the start of the pipeline. Run a hackathon because it's really good at helping you find the people in the space. But the data you're trying to gather is about the people and the technologies, so you know who to start curating once you have the problem. It helps you jumpstart the process. So the challenge with most people in the innovation space is everybody has an activity that they love. They have a methodology. You know, the folks who are design thinking gurus. There are folks who believe in Agile or human-centered or Scrum or anything. The difference between an innovator and somebody with ideas and an entrepreneur is entrepreneurs know how to apply the activities and methodologies in the right order to elicit the right response to make something move, and they know how to manipulate their organizations in order to get past the roadblocks that prevent something from getting done. The challenge that government has, as compared to the rest of the space, is the commercial world has been building and celebrating entrepreneurs for years, and it's a profession. And you go to school and you get a pedigree or a degree, or your reputations are built on those things. There's no doctrine for innovation in the government at all, which means there's nobody defining the roles, there's nobody defining the organizational structure, the pass-throughs, or anything else. There's a lot of regulation and policy, but there's no doctrine that kind of lays it out. So it's messy, and what we end up doing is spending a lot of money on pretty big parties that feel good in the moment, but quite frankly, do a crappy job of delivering data that helps move the ball from one place to the other.
Pete's comments, I think back to my point about the mission model canvas and being how to avoid innovation theater is to really make sure you're clear up front on what problem are you trying to solve, who are the stakeholders, what's the outcome, what is success, how is success defined. The other thing I see a lot that's frankly a waste of time is trying to solve world peace, right? We're not going to solve world peace. You have to break a problem down or challenge down to something that is manageable, that's doable. Show the mission, show the customer that you can add value, you can help them somehow. That's the best way to get them hooked culturally, get hooked in wanting to participate, and then you can evolve that product, right? So the innovation theater thing is so tempting because everybody, particularly Silicon Valley, wants to go visit, you know, all VCs and companies, and it paints the federal government in a bad light, like we're just uncoordinated and everybody's doing their own thing, but it also wastes these people's time. So, you know, I think really having a systematic way like BM&T has developed of managing innovation and recognizing what has to, it is as much a science as it is an art, right? But also forcing accountability up front and being clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have this morning. I want to give you a round of applause. You know, thank you very much for your guys' time and everything. I really do appreciate it. And so, this ends the morning breakout session. So this throughout the day, the Cyber Crawl is going to be open. There's going to be company pitches here, and I want to highlight the AFWERX Austin office just on the other side of the atrium. There's a venture capital talk upstairs on the 8th floor after this, and then any airman that wants to pitch a problem at the end of the day, so at 1400 today, we're going to have a panel listening to airman problem briefs. Signups are going to be at the information desk. That link for that Google link was broken. So if you want to sign up for an Air Force problem brief this afternoon, we can take there's 9 slots. And so sign up at the information desk. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Good job, Tony. So, what's up? I'm gonna go meet with these SOCOM dudes. I think you should probably be in that conversation. SOCOM? Yeah. Right here? Yeah. Nice. Pretty cool. There's a dude that's calling to these. Okay. For us
Okay. Yeah. If there's not money, it's fine. It's no money for me.
Yeah. I'm freaking brief myself. We're looking to update our kitchen, so. Hey, Mark, where do people sign up? They have the info desk.
If you're a judge for the pitch, someone who's going to give feedback for the pitches, if you could just come sit in the second row. If you're a cyber company who's going to pitch and you want to test your AV real quick, you can come up and test your AV.
Jordan Levine.
It'll be a handheld mic.
Hi.
All right, everyone, we're going to get the pitches started. If you don't mind just taking a seat. We're running a little bit behind, so we'll have to stay tight to our 3-minute pitches. All right. Okay, great. So I'd like to kick it off with Z Advanced Computing, starting right now.
Hey, good morning. I'm Major General Retired Dwayne Jones, and I'm excited to introduce two of my friends to you this morning. When I say friends, I've known these guys 25 years. They graduated number 1 and 2 in their class at Cornell, and these great Americans have discovered a really game-changing AI technology that I know you're going to want to know about. So with no further ado, over to you, Bijan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, General Jones, for being one of our team members, and thank you for the SPR inviting us here. So. My name is Bijan Tadayan. Our company is Z Advanced Computing, or ZAC, and we have developed a detailed image recognition based on explainable AI. So basically, it's based on cognition-based and mimics the things that a human do, like for discovery, recognition, and learn. And it's based on explainable AI, and it needs only a few training samples, and it's reusable, modular, cumulative, and scalable learning, and which neural network cannot do. And it detects fine details and from all view angles in 3D. And it overcomes all of the problems with the neural network. And it's available and affordable right now. So we actually beat the best neural network, convolutional neural network, and for example, ResNet, which is used by all companies around the world, including Microsoft, Google, and Apple, and all of the other companies. And in our team, Said and I, we got PhD from Cornell, and we work in multiple startups. And I also work for Naval Research Lab early on, and we also did projects for US government for big IT projects. And one of our team members, Major General Dwayne Jones, he's our US Air Force and DoD liaison, and he's also subject matter expert in this, so he's going to help us to solve Air Force problems. And in our advisory board, we have General Michael Mosley. He was the 18th Chief of Staff of US Air Force, and Marv was the first CIO of US Navy. And in our technical academic board, we have one Nobel Prize in Physics from Cornell,